back to a new video. My name is Jade Shinyu and I help people reclaim back their power physically, mentally and spiritually. Now today we're going to be exposing the dark side of psychedelics. So disclaimer, this is not a video completely bashing psychedelics. However, this is a video revealing certain dangers and very negative consequences and effects that certain psychedelics can have. And unfortunately, people over glamorize psychedelics massively in the spiritual community. And not enough people openly share and discuss the negative consequences of psychedelics, purely because most of the time they're gaslighters that, you know, if they have a bad trip or if they have something negative happen to them because of psychedelics, that it's all their fault. So there seems to be this common theme in the New Age community. And there is a lot of dodgy things that happen in the psychedelic community. Not even blaming the psychedelics itself, but the actual industries, companies, people that are involved in the community. So we're going to be discussing that, and also I'll be sharing tips on what to do to avoid certain dangers if you still definitely want to experience psychedelics for yourself, and the best way to stay safe when doing so. So with psychedelics, I myself have had quite a few experiences with them, and I'm not biased because I have experienced both heavenly things and hellish things. And the funny thing with psychedelics is they can show you literal hell and heaven. Like, you can literally be experiencing the most heavenly, blissful thing ever possible in your life, or you can experience the complete opposite, literal hell. And I mean hell, and anyone who has had a bad trip knows exactly what I'm talking about, when you don't know fear until you have had a bad psychedelic trip. Like, there is nothing that tops it in like the amount of how unpleasant it is. It's literally one of the worst things you can experience, as opposed to perhaps actual physical torture in this reality. And the funny thing with having a bad trip is it makes you so grateful for this normal reality when you come out of it. Like, I have never experienced such gratitude as to when a bad psychedelic trip ends. I've had quite a few mushroom trips, including a very high dose of one, which for me went awful. Comment down below if you want me to share my mushroom experience. It was highly traumatic. I also used to smoke marijuana for a few months straight. It's not that long. Before then it was on and off, but the only time I've done it like a lot, like where it got into pretty much an addiction, it was quite a few months all in a row, and then gradually sort of weaning off. And nowadays I don't smoke it at all. I feel the absolute zero drive to do it, because with marijuana I've also had quite a few negative experiences, and also just witnessing my partner, what he went through, as he went through a very severe addiction to marijuana. And it was so, you know, enlightening to see how much it affected him, because I was extremely biased before towards marijuana. I thought it was completely safe and all harmless and, you know, all that bullshit. But in reality, it's not. And marijuana is one of those things where, again, in the community of marijuana smokers, they're very biased. So it's very difficult for people to come out and actually try and explain why it's not a good idea to be smoking marijuana every day. Like, it's really just common sense. Like, you shouldn't rely on any external substance. Like, no drug or psychedelic will enlighten you, okay? They can reveal certain things, they can do certain healings on you, but ultimately you are the one that has to do the work in a sober state of mind. And that was the tough lesson that I had to learn myself. That was a tough lesson that my partner had to learn. And a lot of people have to learn basically. And unfortunately, the drug psychedelic community attracts a lot of ex-drug addicts. So people who are coming off or trying to get clean off really, you know, way more dangerous, severe drugs such as heroin and coke and, you know, whatever it is. So for them, it kind of becomes a replacement. And of course, it's way less harmful and, you know, more healthy, you know, and safer for them to be doing it. But it doesn't entirely empower them. It doesn't entirely set them free. Like, you can only honestly admit that you're completely free from your addictions when you no longer rely on any external substance. It's really that brutal. Like, you have to be sober. And if you can't go a whole year, even a few months without taking any form of psychedelic, then you have an addiction problem. And that will piss off a lot of people, but I'm sorry to say it's a fact. And you hear this a lot, especially with weed smokers. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that it is dangerous for them, that it's, you know, it hinders their spirituality, because it does. I'm going to go through a few of the negative side effects and dangers of psychedelics in general. And like I said, the number one problem with any psychedelic is that they can become an addiction. So people become overly reliant on them, and it's not their fault. Like I said, a lot of the time it's because they've come from a background of a drug abuse. So it's just like a replacement thing for them to cope in this reality. I get it, you know, this life is hard. But ultimately, it's not going to bring you complete satisfaction or joy long term. And it's very dodgy and risky, especially in this day and age when we live in such uncertainties, that if you can't get your hands on some mushrooms or weed, that you slip into a complete dark depression, or you slip into a meltdown, like you can't function. Like, if you have any substance that does that to you, that does that to your brain, then that's a huge red flag. So if you can't go a few months or a year, preferably, without any psychedelics, you have a big problem. So test yourself and don't become reliant on these things. So another thing that I see, another huge red flag, is people think of, especially ayahuasca is the big one, and DMT, but mainly ayahuasca. They see it as some magic pill. They see it as some quick fix magic pill to magically heal them and magically enlighten them. That's not the case. That is false information. And unfortunately, people say this a lot of the time because they make loads of money at ayahuasca ceremony centers, okay? There are many, many, many centers in Peru now. It's very common, probably hundreds of them, all scattered around in Peru, you know, in the jungle. And they make a lot of money. Some centers, you know, even in Costa Rica, etc., all around the world now, they charge thousands. Like, they charge a lot of money for people to go and do ayahuasca ceremonies. So it's big business. So of course they will shun any negativity to do with ayahuasca or, you know, whatever ceremonies they do, even the tobacco, tea, etc. And because of the money, they cut corners. And what I mean about this is you'll get fake shamans, unfortunately. So there is a lot of fake shamans, okay? And when you visit Peru, especially, like, it is a very isolated place. So if you're going into the Amazon rainforest to see some dodgy shaman who isn't actually a genuine shaman, they just know how to make ayahuasca, and then, you know, you're pretty much on your own to defend for yourself if you have a bad trip. You're pretty much screwed. So there is a lot of darkness within the community, unfortunately. So please do not have the mindset that every ayahuasca place in Peru is all magical and every shaman is some pure enlightened being, because that is not true. It's complete BS. So you have to be very grounded when on the spiritual path. You have to still have common sense. You have to still be streetwise, because these people exploit Westerners, because they know that so many Westerners are lost they're addicts, they have a lot of PTSD, they have trauma, they have illnesses, you know, and they're desperate. They're desperate for something to heal them. Especially ayahuasca is so alluring because it feels like, oh, I just got to have this magical drink and I'll be cured and like a newborn baby the next day. And it's not the case. Of course, some people have amazing experiences, that's good. However, in reality, you still have to do loads of work afterwards. It's not just a quick fix thing. A lot of these people, you know, the natives, there are some bad eggs out there. Of course there is, they're everywhere. So they will exploit people, and it can be very dangerous when these people cut corners. So at times they can give you not even ayahuasca, they'll give you a different herb or mix dangerous herbs in the actual drink. And a thing that's come out is basically them using a herb called toe, which is very similar to ayahuasca, but if it's overdosed, it can be fatal and it can kill you. Another issue is also with the tobacco tea. There have been 2 people that I know of that I've researched who have died from taking this tobacco tea. There was a Canadian woman who was very young who died after the tobacco tea, and there was a young boy called Matthew, I think he was American, and he was only 24 years old and he died. Shortly after having a tea, he felt like he got poisoned and he died. And the shamans had no idea what to do with him. It's a huge controversy, you know. The parents, God bless them, they faced a lot of stress trying to get justice. And they got away with it, so no one was blamed. He died in vain pretty much, and he paid $6,000 to basically get killed. So it's horrendous. Like, it's shocking how these people can get away with this because they have such low safety standards and they don't care. And they just said, oh, it was his fate. It was his fate to die. And then there was another guy who did actually die from ayahuasca itself. So again, no one knows why he died. He was only 18 years old, and he was called Kyle Nolan, I think, Kyle Nolan from the USA. And again, that was a huge controversy because he, you know, was a fit young guy and he died after taking one ayahuasca ceremony. So, and to top it off, the shamans didn't deal with it properly. They didn't call or even tell anyone. They took his body, buried it and hid it in the Amazon jungle until they were forced to dig it back up and give it to the police. So, you know, there's a lot of dodgy characters. There's a lot of, you know, things that you have to be extremely cautious of, just normal things like that with people. And another really bad thing that happens is sometimes the shamans themselves will exploit normally young women who are under the influence of ayahuasca. So there have been numerous accounts of women getting raped, women getting sexually molested whilst having an ayahuasca trip. I mean, that's probably the most traumatizing thing that can ever happen to someone, to be sexually assaulted whilst having a trip. Like, oh my God, and you're incapable of doing anything. So there's been some real horror stories just from the, you know, negative people holding these retreats really badly. So that's rule number 1, is if you are really seeking to do ayahuasca, please do your research and try to go to places that have very high recommendations from people you know personally, or, you know, people online, but do a lot of research. Don't just go to any old random one that you find whilst you're out there traveling, or, you know, that you just find randomly online. Like, do a lot of research to make sure that it is held by very genuine, safe shamans and people. Another issue that I've found with the shamans and the helpers that work at these facilities is that they can turn very cult-like, meaning that they don't treat their staff very well at all, that they literally force them to work for free. So another scam that they have done within these centers is basically the shamans will allow people to work at the, you know, the center. However, the people who work at the center don't earn any money. They don't get paid any wage. In fact, they have to be the ones to pay the shamans just in order to work there. So they have to pay thousands of pounds. So this again happens in like dodgy ashrams in India, similar thing. So basically they become slaves. They become slaves to these people. and they do horrendous hours, they do horrendous free labor, you know, cleaning up vomit. And unfortunately, this has made several people who I've seen and researched about commit suicide. So there's been shamans and facilitators at these centers who are driven to suicide because they just can't handle it anymore. And of course, these people will be doing a lot of ceremonies, they'll be looking after a lot of people, so they have no time, no energy. So, you know, there's a real darkness, and not enough people are talking about these very grounded, very real dangers, which don't even have anything to do with what I'm going to share later on about the more spiritual and psychological dangers of these drugs. But this is just the grounded basics and people don't want to talk about it. They shun it or they turn a blind eye. So, you know, you've got to be careful. Even influencers themselves will be, enforcing ayahuasca retreats. Why? Because they get paid to do so. So you have to always be very cautious and have very, very high discernment when going to any of these sort of places. Because if it goes bad, you're pretty much on your own if you're in a negative place like that. So another problem that arises with psychedelics is another thing that people never seem to talk about, or very little people I see actually admitting it, is of course the dangers, the spiritual dangers with it. So when you're having any sort of drug, any sort of psychedelic, your aura opens. So your energetic field is open, massively opened. You experience astral travel because you're going to different dimensions within your consciousness. It has to be open. So the door is open, basically. And what happens when this door opens is you are now vulnerable. And you are now open to negative entities to attack you. And this can be very troublesome for someone who has a lot of trauma, which ironically, ayahuasca attracts a lot of people, obviously, who've had trauma, because they want healing. But unfortunately, when you feel a lot of fear, which ayahuasca and DMT mainly, and mushrooms can really bring up, but especially ayahuasca, is they basically will re-traumatize you at times, because things that you've pushed down or blacked out or whatever will come to the surface. And ayahuasca has a reputation of really making you face your fears. And sometimes this can be beneficial for people if it's not too traumatizing for them. However, at times it can be really negative and actually hinder you and make things worse. So there's been numerous accounts of people who go to get ayahuasca to heal their PTSD, trauma, or whatever childhood trauma they have, etc. But it makes it worse. It re-traumatizes them even worse. So they don't get healing, and now they're in a worse off state than they was beforehand. Or sometimes people can have such a traumatic experience during the actual ceremony that it just gives them PTSD, and now they're suffering for years or sometimes the rest of their life with this new fear that they didn't have before they had the ceremony, before they had the trip. So numerous things can be the catalyst and reason for this, and I truly believe that psychedelics are not for everyone. That I believe some people who have a lot of heavy negative baggage, a lot of trauma, they really need to be careful with doing this sort of thing, and it has to be more slow and steady. I truly believe that just taking back your power requires building a strong foundation, and that means daily meditation, being on a clean diet, really cleaning up your diet, exercising regularly, and practicing self-love. Those 4 things, and when I say self-love, I also mean love towards other people, and beings. But those 4 things are like fundamental for true spiritual empowerment, for true spiritual healing to take place. And I know this from my own experience and from many other people's experiences. So this is the problem with psychedelics, is they don't really teach these things because now it's become a business. Loads of money involved. Another problem is, people can get so traumatized from the experiences that they have that it can lead them to be put in a mental home, to be institutionalized. And I actually know someone that I used to tattoo with years ago, because I used to be a tattoo artist. And one of his friends, because I said, you know, back then on my early journey, I was like, oh, I really want to try ayahuasca. You know, it's so cool, it's spiritual. And he was just like, oh, I wouldn't if I was you. And he was quite, you know, a psychedelic person himself. You know, he'd done mushrooms now and then, like he wasn't against them. He wasn't that sort of person. But when it comes to ayahuasca, he was very cautious and avoided it. Basically because he had a friend, again, who went to Peru, normal guy, you know, didn't really have much trauma or anything like that. But he had such a horrendous experience with ayahuasca that it sent him literally mad. It sent him insane. And he went into a mental home, and he was there for, you know, years and years and years afterwards. So he's never been the same. Please do not believe people telling you that it's completely safe. And the problem with ayahuasca, because basically ayahuasca is very similar to DMT, but the biggest difference, you know, what makes it like the top most potent drug, or hallucinogenic, is it lasts for hours, where DMT will be very quick. However, when you're in the DMT world, when you're in DMT dimension, it can feel like a lifetime. So again, that can be very traumatizing for people. However, with ayahuasca, it is 100 times probably more intense, because it actually does last for a long time, like hours, probably 6 to 8 hours. I suppose similar to mushrooms, if you have a really high dose of mushrooms. I mean, I know from my experience that I've had trips that lasted probably 10 hours strong. And it was hell, absolute hell. So it can be very, very scary, terrifying for people, because it's like you can't get out of it. Once you're there, and you have to just go through it until it, you know, runs its natural course. But DMT can be, you know, just as bad, if not, you know, obviously. And of course, every, you know, mammal, we all have natural DMT within us. You know, it gets released when we dream, it gets released when we die. That's why people always feel like they're dying when they have psychedelic trips with DMT and ayahuasca, because it's the same chemical that gets released in the brain when we die. So it's very much like a near-death experience when you have these types of substances. And I know from my own experience, I've had, you know, a few experiences when I felt like I did die. Like during one trip, I literally was convinced that I was dead. And this could be, you know, very dangerous when you're out and about and not in a safe place. So the other problem that leads on to the psychological trauma problem that these substances can cause is, of course, which is linked to it, is the spiritual problem. So many people report seeing and interacting with negative entities, demonic beings, you know, in different dimensions, whilst under the influence of ayahuasca or DMT or mushrooms or whatever it is. So these beings, even marijuana, I mean, I have had very horrible experiences with negative entities just under marijuana, like if you have enough. As you know from my other videos, you know, if you watch my content, you'll know how much I talk about negative beings being real. Like, they're not just in your head, they're not just your fears being projected like the new age people love to always say. No, there is beings that live in different dimensions, and when you are going to these dimensions, when you're under the influence of ayahuasca or DMT or whatever, you know, whatever it is, you're going to meet these beings. It's just the same as when you astral project. You can come across positive beings and you can come across negative beings. So it's the exact same thing with DMT and all psychedelics. And this is why some people be like, oh my God, they're so amazing. Oh, I met angels and Jesus and, you know, all these things. Or Gaia or Iwa. And that's because, yeah, you can meet positive beings, 100%, and they can be beautiful. I myself have met, you know, beautiful, lovely beings under the influence of such psychedelics, and they've been magical. You know, I've had, you know, really lovely experiences of meeting many, you know, alien entities and very strange beings. Some weren't even there, like visibly, it was just their energy. And I knew like, oh wow, like I've known this entity for, you know, forever. Like you meet your family sometimes. Other entities that literally you know and love, but you just forget when you're here in the human body and during this human experience. But the other side of the coin is you can come across very nasty characters, unfortunately, just like in real life. So everything is the same. So just like on Earth, you have angelic, beautiful humans, but then you can have the most psychopathic, you know, narcissistic, evil humans as well. And the astral realms and the dimensions that you can visit whilst on psychedelics are exactly the same. So you need to be very cautious and mentally prepared. I mean, you're never mentally prepared when you experience. You think you will be, but you won't. And you can, you know, meet these beings. But the problem with these beings is they can become attached to you. So what can happen a lot of times is, you know, and I've read many encounters and people's stories of having this, you know, awful experience, is you can get entities attached to you because you've opened up the doorway. And now if you become, like, if you interact with a negative entity and they're strong enough to like link themselves to you, you take them back home with you. It's really that simple. It's like a disease, like an illness that you've now contracted. And these entities, once attached to you, you know, they can drive you mad. And this is why a lot of people, unfortunately, do end up in mental homes, not because the drug broke their brain or ruins them. It's literally because they had some negative entity attached to them. And the thing that they do is they then feed off your energy. And I've had numerous experience with this myself throughout my whole life. I mean, obviously it's not just through ayahuasca and DMT and psychedelics. There's many ways, many things that open the door to negative or demonic beings, you know, getting attached to you or feeding off you, etc. Even just astral parasites, they're called. And again, there will be some that are like mild, and then there'll be some that are like severe. And it's the severe ones that can literally ruin your fucking life. Like, it's really that brutal. So it really bothers me and frustrates me when I see people acting like psychedelics, all sunshine and rainbows and 100% safe. It's like, no, they're not. And there's a real danger when entering any dimension, just like there's a real danger when you go out on the street at night, when you go to any new country. Like, you got to be streetwise, but in the astral realms. You got to be streetwise in different dimensions as well, because there are predatory entities. So another problem that I've seen is just people who can also become overly dissociated when they continuously do psychedelics. Especially people who do a lot of marijuana or who just excessively do like DMT like every week, or mushrooms every week. You know, you shouldn't be living your life really in that altered consciousness, because you're here to be human, basically. Like, this is what it's all about. When you die, you go back to those dimensions. When you die, you're free, your spirit is free to go back to them places. But you're here to be human, and you're not here to be escaping that truth, that you're here to be human. And your main goal in this earth is to evolve to a state of love, not to escape, not to run away. And too many people, unfortunately, get addicted to the substances, like I said earlier, and they just overly dissociate and become too attached to just escaping to different dimensions. And I completely get it. Like, you know, Earth is not an easy place to live. It's extremely difficult, but you're here to conquer that in a sober state. That is where true empowerment lies, is when you can conquer this world in a sober state. Because if you overly, you know, the long-term effects of exploiting these drugs is becoming very depressed. Because then once you're overly attached to the other dimensions and you learn how everything is an illusion, you then adopt this subconscious attitude of, well, what's the point? Like, you don't want to live anymore. You become, you know, you get a great sense of apathy and dissociation. So it can be very troublesome. It can ruin the experience of you just being human and living a grounded life and conquering and learning lessons that you actually came here to learn. Shedding karma, you know, doing all the important inner work, doing the work that you actually came here to do, even just to be of service to others. So it can turn people very lethargic, very selfish as well, people who turn into like severe drug addicts. Because then it's like, what are you doing? What good are you doing to the world if you're stoned all the time? None. So you can't just become a stoner and just, you know, do nothing. You're not here to do that. You're here to be very selfless. You're here to be very strong. You're here to be a powerful light, because that's who you truly are. Deep down, that's who you are. These psychedelics are to be treated, you know, with utter respect. They're to be treated, you know, very cautiously. You don't need to be doing ceremonies regularly. Sometimes you can just do one ceremony and then that's it. That's all you need to do in your lifetime. You know, I would very much recommend doing them very, you know, sparsely in between, you know, very far in between each other. Otherwise it can lose its effect. So the following things I'm going to say are certain tips that you can do to avoid having a bad trip if you do decide to have ayahuasca or DMT or mushrooms or whatever it is. So the number one thing is you must eat clean, especially if you're doing ayahuasca or something really intense. So you should be on a vegan diet, so no alcohol, no meat, dairy, any of that, nothing too processed or sugary or salty, for at least a month before. Like, you need to really clean your body. Otherwise, if you do have an ayahuasca retreat, you'll just spend the whole ceremony purging. So you'll just be throwing up and probably shitting out all those toxins that you've eaten over the past month. So it's really a waste of time, because you could have got great insights or an experience that you actually wanted, but instead you just spent the whole time throwing up because you've been eating crap. So you need to have a very pure vessel, a really clean body as much as possible, to do a detox beforehand, etc. So you can have the best, you know, possible experience. Even if you're doing mushrooms, like what I would do is, I mean, I'm vegan anyway, and I was always vegan doing them, but I would not eat in the mornings. I would just have a little bit of fruit. So I'd be in quite a fasted state. And so I'm very light, very empty. And then I would break it with fruit or something sweet. So yeah, eat clean beforehand with any sort of, you know, ceremony. And number two is, of course, to be in a safe place whenever doing any sort of psychedelic. So this involves the people you're with, the surroundings, the land that you're on, the energy, like, has the space been cleaned? Or is it a room where loads of fights and arguments have happened? Like, wherever you are, please make sure that the energy is cleaned and cleansed. If you're doing it at home, then cleanse the whole house, open the windows, sage it, bless it with water, like, make it as clean and blessed and good energy as possible. So you want it to have a very high vibration. And if you are obviously going to Peru, you know, to do ayahuasca or anything like that, or DMT, then make sure that they do the same thing. You know, ask them, have you cleansed the room? Like, you know, make sure that it has a good environment, a good vibe. So be very careful, of course, like I said earlier, where you go. Make sure it's a very, you know, highly rated place with genuine shamans, and be with people you trust, because when you are on a high on the trip, you don't know how you're gonna act. So sometimes you can literally have a full-on mental breakdown. You could be screaming, you could be shitting yourself, you can be throwing up. Like, you don't know what you're gonna do. So please have pure intentions when going into it, and be prepared to completely embarrass yourself and make a fool of yourself, quite frankly, if it comes to that. So it's about being extremely vulnerable, because it's a very raw experience. And if you're someone who hasn't had an ego death, you will certainly experience that. So be prepared for an ego death, because you'll certainly have it if it's your first time. And that can be quite terrifying. So that leads me to number three, is meditate beforehand. If you're someone who isn't on a spiritual path and you just want to try some psychedelics, it can be quite terrifying, just in the sense that you will experience an ego death. You will learn that you are just a spirit in the body. Like, you won't just see it, you'll know it. And it's a real big difference to just hearing people saying it and actually knowing it. So that can be very like, you know, it can give people panic attacks, it can cause a lot of anxiety, it can make people, you know, extremely scared and uncomfortable when they actually feel and realize that truth. So it's not always, again, sunshine and rainbows and people just being like, oh wow, like it can be very scary for some people. So I'd meditate, you know, 15 minutes a day to really get your mind sort of prepared for that beforehand for, you know, a good few weeks. So that's pretty much everything I have to say. I don't want this video to be too long. Let me know in the comments if you want to know more. I'll probably do you know, videos on my own personal experiences, my good and bad ones. But just remember that pure self-empowerment will always be achieved in a sober state. And I cannot stress that enough. So as magical and amazing as psychedelics can be, please understand that they are not a quick fix. They are not something to be exploited and taken daily. They're something, you know, they need to be treated with respect and utmost caution. I'll link all my links in the description box below, so please follow me on Instagram, and don't forget to like, subscribe and click the notification bell so you get notified with my future videos. To do one-to-one oracle card readings, so if you are interested in that and more services and free ebooks that I have, it will all be in the links down below. And until next time, much love, much light to you. Ahimsa.